Hi, I'm Mark Winstein, founder of Vegan Launch, and today I want to talk to you about our plans to mobilize $1 trillion of investment capital into the vegan economy. I'm speaking from experience in accomplishing unusual things. In 1983, I founded an energy and water conservation company, and that accomplished to a large degree the fusion of environmentalism and economy. And I co-founded a national environmental group in the 90s, and we'll talk a little bit more about the impacts of that work in another slide. Those two experiences led me into the field of public venture capital finance. And that field has evolved over the past 20 years to now we have superb laws and superb tools for mobilizing large amounts of money into things that, for the most part, people still consider as the realm of charity and government. And when we move those things into the realm of finance, so much more can be accomplished in such a short period of time. And I look forward to sharing that with you in this encompassing presentation that brings together, in a distilled version, a lifetime of impact business and efforts to solve the world's most pressing challenges in new ways. Before I get too far into it, I want to talk about capitalism. A lot of people who care about the planet and care about the animals, they think capitalism is bad. And capitalism is not, in my opinion, good or bad. And if we carry on the notion of good and bad things like despotism, tyranny, exploitation, that's existed under every system. And systems that predate these kind of systems, feudalism, kingdoms. And so when we look at these kind of terms, capitalism, socialism, communism, these are just the latest iterations to describe the overall movement of society toward the possibility of more peace and more power distribution. And the question really is always, what is the right way to distribute power? Capitalism, most people don't even realize, was an alternative to feudalism. And the intent was to originally a power-sharing agreement with the feudal kings and a distribution. So is it perfect? No. Do people do terrible things under capitalism? Yes. But fundamentally, capitalism is not about doing bad. That was not the intent. It was simply a way of determining who controls the kind of large-scale cultures where money comes into play, much more so than in small and rural communities. So capitalism is where trade and industry are controlled by private owners. That's just what it is. There's nowhere in the definition of capitalism that says with the intent to do bad or to do harm. Same with socialism. No intent to do harm. It's just different. The means of production, distribution, exchange are owned or regulated by the state. There's always a question: is the state better at deciding, or are individuals better at deciding? And the socialist countries like Sweden try to strike a balance where they provide valuable goods and services to the community, such as nationalized health care. At the same time, Sweden has the largest number of billionaires per capita in the world. So, interesting dichotomy. Capitalism and individual ownership and shared ownership can exist together in one system. The notion of ownership and money go hand in hand. In communism, the goal is that all property is owned by the state and no individuals make independent decisions. Is that working? There really aren't any countries that give a demonstration of communism providing a satisfying experience for the population. And what we find is countries that might call themselves communist typically also prevent people from leaving those countries. When you can't exit a system, that's a pretty good sign that the system is not serving people if they have to be forced to stay on board. And yet, even countries like Russia now have stock markets. So the world is really just a blur, in a way, of financial systems, financial philosophies. And what we're bringing to the table here is something bigger. rather than talk about the methodology per se, these to me are all different kinds of tools. And there's vegan restaurants and vegan businesses in Russia. You know, veganism is transcendent of these trivializing things. But when we look at the system for what it is, we can see there are tools that we can use to change people's opinions at a cultural scale. And that's what's really needed today more than anything. So when I tell people I want to mobilize $1 trillion, a lot of them say, well, where are you going to get the money? Well, I'm going to tell you, we're going to sell vegan investment products into a $30 trillion capital market. And let's describe that market. So there are a lot of different investment markets. Public stocks today represent about $100 trillion worth of investment capital. There's real estate, there's private investment holdings, precious metals, currency trading. So there are a lot of different pools of capital. But if we just zoom in on this one pool, we see there's $100 trillion. This is very well documented. And then people who care about healthy and green lifestyles, which include vegans, they represent about a 30% share of this investment market, or $30 trillion, which is quite a lot of money. There's certainly plenty of money available to solve the world's problems. The challenge is mobilizing that money, placing it, because the only way to mobilize this money is to offer an investment product. You're not going to see this money easily flowing into charities. And that's really the challenge. We're going to zoom in on charities versus businesses and see why the charitable notion is at such a disadvantage, and wherever we can align the mainstream economy with our vegan and ecological values, we have a huge advantage. So next, let's zoom in on this $3 trillion slice of the overall green economy, the vegan investment niche. And that's divided further into 3 equal parts, roughly. So this is the vegan wealth distribution in terms of public stock holdings. People who have under $1 million in their portfolio hold about $1/3 trillion. Now remember, this is still a high-end segment of society. This is not all people. Most people have no investments. But of vegan investors, 1/3 is held by people who only have $1 million or less in their portfolios. And if we expand this to the overall market, those kinds of numbers hold in a general way. Well, by laws that were put on the books in 1933, namely the Securities Act, investing in public companies or public investment offers became pretty much illegal after 1933. It's very difficult for this segment to ever be involved in startups. And because of the way those laws evolved, even the next wealthier segment of the market, 1 million to 10 under management, really are rarely involved in early stage investing. And this is a real problem because the companies that are shaping culture today are the ones that were funded 10 years ago. So if we look at a company like Beyond Meat or Oatly, Beyond Meat got their first capital over 10 years ago. Oatly is a 20-year-old company that only went public this year. So the lack of engagement of this segment of the population means all this money is just lying on the sidelines, unable to really serve the growth of the vegan sector. And even with 10 million and above, really we're just looking at a small corner of the wealth niche. Really about the top 1% are making the major decisions about what kind of companies are going to get funded. And that shapes our culture in a very profound way, in a lot of ways, much more than political decisions. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think the thing that's missing is that most people invest for their own self-interest. So when you have just the top 1% deciding how the economy looks, they're going to shape the economy in their own self-interest. And that results in what we have today, incredibly economic divided culture in the West, especially in the United States now. The divides between the wealthy, middle class, and the less wealthy, the least wealthy, are bigger than they've been since the Gilded Age. And that's a real problem when people in a culture can't even really survive barely. And yet the wealth is held by the top few. So what Vegan Launch is doing, we're using new public investment laws to broaden the market, broaden the engagement, and by doing that, we can build impact and value-based companies that serve the whole market. So it's not that I have something against the wealthy, but I'm for engaging the whole market where we have common interests, which is building a vegan future. So how do I know I can do this? How do I know? It's not me doing it. I need to do it with you. It's not, I'm just laying out a program. If enough people agree, we'll move $1 trillion. That's really pretty much what this is all about. And so one thing I like to say that helps people understand, movements create markets. So here's a chart of logging on the national forests of the United States. And you can see the logging volume just skyrocketed. Meanwhile, the biodiversity on those lands was just decimated. It was just devastating to nature. This program of logging was never the intention in the early design of the Forest Service to have this kind of intensive logging on those lands. Well, inside of this crisis, a national movement, it was called the Forest Protection Movement, evolved. And by the time I got to Washington, D.C. in 1990, the movement was starting to really get ahead of steam. And we were part of a coalition of about 800 environmental groups all around the country and scientists and everyone working together to try to stop this crisis. And by working in community, we all together brought the logging volume back down to the lowest point it was since 1940. So 80% less logging, but when we understand the system that the National Forest was, it was a system of subsidies. It was the basic intent was to subsidize the timber industry. It had shifted from conservation to just basically a handout. And the money still had to flow into the Forest Service. But since it couldn't go into these illegal logging projects, it flowed into a restoration economy. So $2 billion of the Forest Service budget started moving annually into what we might call ecosystem restoration projects. And about that time, I felt like I had done my work. By 2000, I realized that if we really want to be comprehensive in solving the problems, we have to be there when the movement shifts into the mainstream economy. And we're seeing that veganism has moved into the mainstream economy. Now we've got companies like Tyson Meats. They have a plant-based protein line. How could that possibly happen if it weren't for veganism? And yet, as vegans, we're not really there on the same capital playing field as the meat industry that's beginning to absorb the momentum of the movement and turn it into those kinds of products, at the same time continuing to invest in animal abuse and exploitation. Tyson continuing to invest in chicken slaughterhouses. It's like they just don't really get it and they don't really care. If they can make money, for them, money first is the rationale. For those of us that care about impact, we have to follow our values first and have money flow along our values and commitments. So here's another case where the organic food movement grew into, by 2015, a $43 billion industry, now much larger. Whole Foods opened its first store in 1980 when the organic food industry was only about $1 billion annually. And they thought the time was right to kind of mainstream the organic food value set. And that value set cause certain consumers to make value-based purchasing decisions. And that's why Whole Foods was able to skyrocket. They weren't adding food to the market. Everyone who was eating enough food was eating as much food as they wanted. But instead, it was a value-based decision. And most of the Western economy is really based on value. So as values change, and veganism is a value, as those change, very large capital shifts and flows of money can move into the new value system. So we have to understand that principle very clearly. That's how, the faster we can change values and then supply those values with the economic opportunities, whether it's investing or whether it's consumer goods, business to business, all those opportunities can flow along the vegan value concept, which of course, animal rights, protection of the environment, and optimizing human health through healthy food and lifestyle choices. So into that framework, and myself being experienced in both business and nonprofits, I looked at finance as the key limiting factor. If we really want to grow any impact economy, we need to master the field of finance. And so in 2001, I set out to really master that field. But in a new way. I didn't really want to learn from people who are willing to do anything to make money. And that's represented by these kinds of players. These are the kind of people who, let's just say their ethical value is more money is always right, whether it complies with the laws or whether they have to change the laws. And so it's not really that they were necessarily, I don't like to look at people as good or bad, but we definitely have different ethics. We have different value frameworks. And we might say, well, okay, if we're vegans and environmentalists, our values might be represented by these nonprofit organizations, animal rights organizations, and environmental groups. Why can't these groups just solve the problem for us? Why are they not really able to move the culture as far as is necessary? And I'm going to show you exactly why. So let's look at the budget. This is the budget, the 2020 budget, or the last year's budget. 2020 for PETA was $55 million. Sounds like a lot of money. The Sierra Club's budget was $150 million. Now, the thing is, let's put that into perspective. The smallest Fortune 500 company last year had revenue of $5 billion. So here, off by a factor of 100. So PETA is only 100th the size, roughly, of the smallest Fortune 500 company. And then there's another 499 companies bigger than that. And the Sierra Club, in roughly the same league, about 1/40th or so, 1/35th of the smallest Fortune 500 company. Now, let's look at the revenue of BlackRock and Goldman Sachs in comparison. So Goldman Sachs, $47 billion of revenue, and BlackRock, $16 billion of reported revenue for 2020. So Goldman Sachs is almost 10 times larger in terms of revenue than the smallest Fortune 500 company. So now we're looking at close to only the footprint of PETA, you might say. The economic footprint is only 1/1000th revenue-wise. But that's not all, because these companies make their money by managing large-scale investment projects. And they have trillions of dollars under management. This is why when we really see how much money in terms of investment decisions are influenced by this relative handful of people, we see that $1 trillion is not really that much to aim for. It's actually kind of low. It's only 1% of the public investment market. And when you add in the other markets, it becomes an even smaller percentage. So, but the thing is, we need to be talking, the number has to start in the trillions. If we're going to change the world, we need to start getting comfortable with the notion of trillions. These people are. And that's why they have an outsized shape on the culture and the culture of the future. Now, if there's no vegan value ethics backed by all of these financial decisions, what are we going to get? More of the same. And I think if you've watched so far into this presentation, you want something different, and Vegan Launch is here to offer that. What we are is a blend. We're using finance as a community organizing platform. That way we can do the kind of mobilization that we think of when we think of these grassroots organizations, and yet we have the potential in doing so to move the kind of capital that are normally associated with big Wall Street enterprises like this. Now, let's give an example of some of the opportunities. A lot of people come to Vegan Launch because they're looking for investment opportunities. And the vegan environmental value set is a massive opportunity, but it's been very poorly executed because the lack of direct public involvement. But let's look at some financial basics, revenue and capital valuation. And we're going to talk a little bit about carbon credits, but before we do that, we just want to look at some of the basics of valuation. So Tesla is a very well-studied company, And right now, their valuation is about 20 times their annual revenue, okay? And they're valued at $1 trillion, roughly, give or take 100 billion, depending on what day you look at the numbers. So, and then there also, another valuation is profit. So revenue and profits are numbers that investors use to determine relative value between different enterprises. And the interesting thing of late is that Tesla is now valued, the valuation of one company is the same as the valuation of all the other auto manufacturing companies on the planet. And people say, well, that's just too much. Why? Why is it valued so high? Because Tesla is a climate change company. It's a technology play to address climate change, of which cars is just a factor in the overall solution. Whereas the car companies are just in the car business and they're not providing much of value in that, and they just don't care about climate change. If they did, they would stop doing what they're doing. They would have stopped 20 years ago. But they don't care, and that's really the challenge. And so as caring investors, this creates a very strange market situation where Tesla is really virtually the only company of any really solid meaning in the public domain that's dealing with climate change. There are plenty of companies in the private investment space, but again, until now, those companies have been basically off limits for the general public to invest in. So bridging that gap is really vital for solving these kind of problems. And Tesla went public very early, and in doing so, that gave them the opportunity to use the NASDAQ as their own crowdfunding platform. Not all of us can do that, but soon we're going to see what we can do. But again, let's get back to valuation. So where are the value streams going to come from? There's an important point we need to know. This is just one revenue stream. So global annual carbon credits are set to exceed $50 billion by 2030. That means that's $50 billion of cash flow into the general carbon economy, or the carbon reduction economy, we'll call it. Tesla's in the carbon reduction economy. They're to the point where they don't really need subsidies. They've managed to get mainstream enough where they're profitable without carbon credits. But we're going to be seeing carbon credits probably for the rest of the lifetime of anybody who's watching this video, because now there's enough people in the world that are saying we have got to create this collective value, because if not, trillions of dollars of real estate are going to be underwater. The cost to not doing this is so high. And 50 billion is probably going to be a low number. But let's take the number predicted normally, 50 billion by 2030. So what is this revenue stream worth? What is this revenue stream worth? Well, at 10 times revenue, that would be valued at $500 billion. Or you could say that if you had the whole 50 billion in revenue, you'd have a company with an asset value of 50 billion if we're using the Tesla metrics. And again, the demand by the investor market for impact investments way outstrips the supply today. So that means that these kinds of companies are going to all be trading at a premium if they can execute well. And if we go to Tesla's number, 20x revenue, that same 50 billion in revenue could be valued at $1 trillion. So this is where the investment thesis starts to materialize. We can see that we should organize to be moving capital into climate change projects, because just on the very basics, there's at least 50 billion in cash flow. That's a revenue market that the companies that are funded through Vegan Launch can participate in and generate some revenue that way. And the projects we've looked at that play in that space, they generate revenue from many sources, not just carbon credits. We have a large portfolio of unfunded but very fascinating forest restoration projects that involve non-exploitive revenue opportunities as well as carbon credits to create the financial rationale for protecting and restoring forests, which, as you can see, is pretty close to my heart. And as vegans, I think forest protection is so tied in with everything that we care about, because the main cause of deforestation these days is not the timber industry demand for wood, it's deforestation for the global meat industry, which is just unconscionable in this era. But that's just one revenue stream. So we've already done a small report where we assessed a number of markets, and we found $12 trillion of revenue that are moving into industries that all need extensive vegan alternatives. And we're all familiar with, beef, dairy, poultry, the whole animal food, animal products industry, we'll call that. And then these industries are kind of hand in glove with logging, leather, corn production, soy production. And then there's this other industry, healthcare. Healthcare is an $8 trillion industry. And Dr. Dean Ornish says that about $7 trillion of that goes to treating illnesses caused by an animal, consuming animals and lifestyle issues. So that creates a $7 trillion open field for a whole new way of delivering health to people. What people want is, people don't want drugs, they want health. They just don't know it because we've spent the last almost 100 years convincing people that their illnesses have no cause. And the plant-based doctors have been proving that over and over again, that not only is there a cause, but many of these illnesses are reversible. And I actually started Vegan Launch because of illnesses I reversed by by going vegan and then eating a plant-based diet. Another, again, we talked about habitats earlier, billions and billions of dollars of investment opportunities in these areas. But the thing is that we need to mobilize in a certain way. And here's something I like to show as another just unending investment opportunities in cleaning up the world's pollution. This is an air pollution chart of India and Southeast Asia. Green is breathable air. Green is what we might call air. Yellow is like tolerably polluted air, but it's very noticeable. And I've lived in Thailand and some of these countries, and I've experienced some of these different charts. Above yellow, it becomes really intolerable, unconscionable. And yet, in many countries, people are waking up every day into basically a toxic stew. What's supposed to be air is just pollution. And a lot of this pollution is tied. When you look at where the pollution comes from, you'll see that a large portion drives back to the animal industry one way or another. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details here just because I want to keep the presentation moderately short. But when you really look at the world's problems, when you really drill into them, you'll find that there's some kind of animal component to almost every situation like this. And that means that there's so many opportunities for vegan financiers, vegan entrepreneurs, and vegan investors to work together and get these problems handled. The transformation of this problem will just create massive opportunities, massive economic opportunities. And so what I like to ask is, okay, there's so many billions, maybe trillions of opportunities represented just on this map. How much is going to go into techno fixes, technology? I'm a fan of technology. I like technology. I'm making this presentation with technology, but I really love ecology. And to me, ecology, veganism, these are kind of the underserved areas of finance. And that's why I put my focus there, because really technology is well served by capital, better served at least. There's still many, many thousands of environmental tech companies that are not getting the funding they need. But sometimes simple solutions are the best, and most sophisticated investors, venture capital funds, don't want to invest in the obvious, easy solution. But when we use the methods of public venture capital that Vegan Launch is pioneering, it gives us an entire palette. We're not constrained anymore. We can really invest in any opportunity for change no matter how high-tech or low-tech it might be. So if there's so much money and so many opportunities, what's the problem? What's the bottleneck? Why is that money not getting where it belongs? And because we're focused on the vegan economy, we're really drilling into the numbers that matter. And we've discovered that only about 1 in 200 vegan founders seeking capital receives any funding. That's less than 1%. Why is this a crisis? Well, we already know that the animal industry is the major source, or one of the major sources of climate gases. Anywhere from 20% to 50% is the estimate. If we don't, and it's also the point of the easiest and the most rapid resolution. All we have to do is stop eating animals and the industry will go away. They won't be able to keep polluting because there won't be any energy, any financial energy to keep it going. So it's the easiest problem to solve just through lifestyle changes. And yet, at the same time, we've got at least 2,000 vegan founders with powerful ideas seeking capital, and again, only 1 in 200 getting any money. And the reason is because, again, if we go back to the Securities Act of 1933, that basically outlawed public offers, public investment offers by founders. And so the only people that could afford to raise money from the general public had to be already wealthy. And the whole seed capital industry really moved from something that engaged the whole culture into a very rarefied atmosphere where these days only really the top 1% of wealth holders are typically involved in those decisions. So that's really why the world looks the way it is, because I've been seeing this for 20 years. People with solutions have trouble getting funding because they may not fit the very narrow frameworks of the venture capital style investment thesis. And yet there's so many other kinds of investment styles, infrastructure, and more and more. And when we go direct to the investor market with these investment products, we have a whole new creative palette for designing companies that can really serve people as opposed to just primarily serving a few investors. And of course, serving the investors, the broad base of investors at the same time. So that's that's a whole additional presentation about really why it works. But just, I'm telling you, when we go direct from the project to the broad financial market, the opportunities just blossom. How is this possible now? What happened between 1933 and today to create this new direct financing model? Well, again, we call it public venture capital. And in 2012, the United States government passed a law called the Jobs Act, and it allowed for grassroots public venture capital. So we're just going to go over some of the path now for a new generation company to raise capital without being dependent on the private venture capital investment firm, and also not being dependent on ultra high net worth individuals. This is not an attack on those players. It's just we're trying to fill in with all the capital that's sitting on the sideline due to the kind of unconscious move in this direction. So a lot of you have heard of regulation crowdfunding. This law, the rules around this law were updated just in March of 2021. Now, a company can raise up to $5 million from the general public with a $100 million minimum investment. And they don't need to go public. They can raise money from the public, but they can still operate privately. This was a major innovation in the way the laws work, because in the past, when companies raised money from the public, they were required to give the public trading opportunities. And that resulted in things like pink sheets, penny stocks, and just those things are often just venues for massive manipulation. Companies that are too small really shouldn't trade. They just don't have it takes a large amount of financial and marketing energy to maintain your stock value in the public arena when there's so many predatory investors out there trying to just make money on the gyrations of a stock price. Now, one of the beautiful things of these public offers is that the sale of the offers themselves create a mass education opportunity. So this means that in the very sale of the investment products to fund the first $5 million for these companies, that's a mass education opportunity. And what are we trying to do? bring the understanding of veganism and all the benefits to a broader culture. Really, this is about cultural change. And in using these financial strategies and tools, we now have a whole new communication channel that's not available to the charities and governmental strategies. Now, after regulation crowdfunding, the next step up is something called Regulation A. And under this regulation, which was also updated in March 2021, now a business can raise up to $75 million from the general public without necessarily going public. And the same $100 minimum investment, and now a much bigger mass education project because it's a larger amount of capital. And of course, all of us have heard of the IPO, initial public offering, into a major market like the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. And this is a way of raising really unlimited billions of dollars. The minimum investment is typically less than $100. And so now this is a much more massive market and yet another mass education opportunity. So from what we're seeing here is a seamless path from raw startup, good idea, back of the napkin, in raising stage by stage and making milestone after milestone, all the way up to the IPO without relying on famous Hollywood stars to fund you, venture capital funds. And again, nothing against these people. They're all doing their best, but we need to move more people. We have this huge market of 4 million vegan investors that are part of a larger 34 million person segment of green and healthy oriented investors. All of them need to participate. All of them want to participate. That's the real thing. They want to. And without what Vegan Launch is providing, they just can't. So we think that they're going to enjoy investing in these companies because I've seen so many and I'm so inspired by the companies, the kind of leadership that exists in the vegan entrepreneurial community. So Vegan Launch is offering something new. We're not saying don't do this. We're not saying don't do political activism. But I've been a political activist for the environment, and it worked pretty well. I mean, in relative to what we put into it. But the challenge is, it's very hard to scale this because people have to take time off of their day job to do this. It's very difficult. And so the idea of political activism is to somehow urge politicians to intervene in culture against the existing power structure who's profiting from the exploitation of animals and the exploitation of the planet. Now, it does make results, but these results are often very limited and fragile, and they rarely result in outcomes that match the scale of the challenges. This is the real thing, is that if we rely only on political activism, we're just not going to really get to the vision of a vegan world and all the good things that means. So let's learn a little bit about activism from the real pros. Who do you think are the best activists, the best cultural activists on the planet? Now, hope you're sitting down. Ta-da! So these guys, they know activism inside and out. What did McDonald's do? We'll call it business activism. Now, they set out to change the world. They decided that eating healthy food at home with your family was a bad idea, and that it would be better if everyone ate fast food and junk food that they would provide. So they literally created a whole new culture. They taught us how to eat in a whole new way. And to be very frank, I grew up during the era of their early expansion. And what they were doing is they were selling, there were other major trends going on in the culture. What was going on is that the United States was becoming less and less of an agrarian culture and more industrial. And you had the nuclear family instead of the farm family and everyone working together. Now, the housewives in particular were staying at home all day while the husbands worked in an office. And then by the end of the day, they were burnt out. And they still had to cook and clean because of the rigid gender roles as well. So McDonald's all day on TV was saying, you deserve a break today. Take your family to McDonald's. You won't have to cook and you won't have to clean, and it costs less than if you cooked yourself. That was a very powerful rationale of that era to move the culture into buying their product. And they use finance and marketing to shift cultural values at a mass scale. And now, of course, we're in this hellish world that came from the sort of mono value set that had no reference to ecology and certainly no reference to human health or animal rights. Now, in this kind of business activism, government relations now becomes a deductible business expense. And this is why the meat industry can spend $120 million a year just on government relations to influence policies. Those policies drive excess profits into those industries. Without the taxpayers basically subsidizing these kinds of industries, they would collapse under their own weight. They don't add enough value to rationalize their role in culture without all the degradation they do being subsidized with favorable laws and purchasing by governments. Now, we can do the same. If we look at veganism as an economic movement as opposed to purely ideological, now we have the same set of tools to move culture in the direction we'd like to take it. Now, maybe 100 years from now, people will criticize us for that, but I think it's a risk that we have to take. Let's look at how some of the other big players use their finance and government to achieve their business goals. So here's what Walmart does. This is basically the Walmart playbook. When they want to move into a town or a region, what they do is they buy the cheap farmland. It's zoned non-commercial, so it's illegal for them to actually build on it. Why would they buy it if it's illegal to build a Walmart there? Well, because they know they're going to work the political system, and then maybe, a year or two later, they'll have their cronies on the city council, and those people will then vote to change the zoning on the land they've been holding, causing the value of that land to skyrocket. Now they've got a choice. They can develop on the land that they bought for pennies on the dollar, or they can sell the land at a profit. So either way, by using finance and politics in a more strategic way, they're achieving their goals. Is that right? Is that wrong? Is it corrupt? We have to step back a little bit. I've studied politics starting from the dawn of political civilization about 5,000 years ago, maybe a little bit more. Politics has its own flavor. And rather than looking at it as something that needs to stop, we just have to look and say, well, this is the way power flows. Power flows from those that organize the economy into the brutish people that run politics. Because since the dawn of politics and the kings, they've been in charge of the military. And there's always been this delicate balance between the kind of people and enterprises that generate wealth and then the politicians' tendency to spend that wealth on killing other people in military. And now, for the world to survive, we have to move past the military mindset as an organizing principle. And certainly peace is not a very well-explored economic framework. At Vegan Launch, we've taken great pains and with processes that I've developed literally over 20 years to do our best to have a peace-based economic platform. We'll leave the war to the other guys, but we think that what's really missing is the growth of peace-based economic opportunities, and that's why I do what I do. So let's look at how Walmart's approach might be used for peaceful ends. And are the means wrong? Are they right? They just are. It's just the nature of humanity that those with power and economic power have an outsized influence on government policy. And the thing is, with $3 trillion in our wallets as vegans, in our portfolios, we're not the underdogs. We actually have the ability to make very positive choices. Or again, if we expand that to the whole 30 trillion, it's really a question about, can we make agreements? Having spent 10 years in Washington, I really found out you don't need to be corrupt. You don't need to buy off politicians to get things to happen. We had floor votes. It was hard, but we got votes on our legislation and we made progress and we had results. And not at any time did we do anything, certainly not illegal, but not even in terms of unethical. There was just no need for corruption, because you know what the hardest part is? Just being able to afford to show up. When you structure your movement using business and finance, suddenly you find you can afford to show up. And you have to actually pay attention to the one thing that business is different. You actually have to make enough agreements that it generates profit, but you don't need to generate a lot of profit to make things financeable. So here, this is our pet project right now. We're looking for people who want to lead this project, but in terms of the structure and the ability to raise capital for it, that's in place. So we call it zero carbon cities because still our cities are full of open space, what's left of it, and that's rapidly getting bought up and turned into, developments that are counter to a healthy future. And, having no framework about climate change or any other environmental or social issues, just, quick buck artists, we'll call it. And for most people, making a quick buck is the goal in life. We think we can make money, and a lot of it, but doing it aligned with our values. So we look back at that Walmart strategy. What do? Organize the capital, buy forest lands and open space. They may not generate a whole lot of profit in day one. But there is, again, we're looking at the climate credits. Those are increasing. These things can be penciled out. Then we work the political system to maximize the carbon revenue and, of course, also undo the externalization subsidies that are going to the industries that compete with healthy forests. So healthy forests have such an important role in our culture. They produce so many values, but like many things that work for free, we treat them poorly. And now what's beautiful is that we're seeing the climate credits are an indication that people are beginning now finally to internalize, to recognize the value of our silent friends who are trying to keep the world healthy for us. And with additional capital, we can help redevelop the urbanized areas into all kinds of beneficial businesses, protecting our water supply, veganizing the industries, veganizing the food supply, bringing people up in their health. I mean, it's really a beautiful future that we can look and see if we organize financially. And that's why I've created this free online course called Capitalism for Activists. In this course, you'll learn a complete playbook for actually accomplishing what I've laid out in this presentation. And why am I offering it for free? Because we really need people at Vegan Launch who can understand just kind of the ABCs of ethical impact finance, business development, and capitalism. Because, I think there's a lot of different paths forward. I'm not critical of people who have other paths forward that they're experimenting with for cultural change. But we've laid out this path here, and we see the opportunity. So we need people who have a strong ethical point of view, who are willing to use the tools of finance and technology that have been provided to us by the larger culture. And I like to look at this, I call it the flower economy. Now, if we look at a flower like a rose, or in Asia, they like to look at the lotus, what do these have in common? Well, a rose sits on top of a very thorny stem. And if you look at all of the culture and the development that's gone before where we're at today, it's kind of ugly. The road system is ugly, the infrastructure, there's a lot of just brutality that went into building the kind of culture that we have where now I can make a video and distribute it globally over the internet. But that was a lot of hard work. So here we want the flower, but the flower can't survive without the stem. So at a certain level, if we want to really grow the vegan economy, we have to learn how to dock with the mainstream financial economy. If we want to transform that economy, we have to learn how to tie in and get that the nutrients, you might say. The same with the lotus. In Asian countries, they like the lotus. It's the same analogy. The roots are in mud, and yet this beautiful flower sits on top. the entire organism. There's a certain kind of necessity to that. We might even say that for us to have this kind of flowering economy that we want, we might look back and say, well, all of this kind of gross stuff was sort of a precursor. And if we take that attitude, now we can look with more kindness on the people that are sustaining all of that infrastructure. And you almost, it's like they just did it for us. It's like, here's your $30 trillion. How would you like to spend it? How would you like to invest it, really? It's not so much spending it, it's really how would you like to invest it? Because again, that $30 trillion of capital represents, again, at least another $30 trillion in annual revenue. So there's the cash flow that's represented by the capitalization itself. And that intimate relation between capital and cash flow, that's how the economy fundamentally works, no matter what you call it. No matter what ism you call it, they all have that same fundamental relationship. It's really just about who makes the decisions. And we think vegans should make the decisions, and that's why I invite you to sign up for our free Capitalism for Activists course and learn how to be a financial leader and decision maker. Now, beyond the free course, we're building a community for people who now are educating themselves and understanding the power of public venture capital. We have an online platform where people can come together and work on projects, whether it's helping to finance a vegan entrepreneur or helping them get ready for finance. There's so many opportunities and so many tasks that contribute to this whole economy growing. And so we've developed the Vegan Launch community as a working platform that is constantly evolving to help us more efficiently solve the kinds of problems that need to be solved quickly. So for example, it's taken me 20 years really to master finance, especially including this new era. Now, if we take the 2,000 vegan businesses that are seeking capital, and we multiply that by 20 years, that's 2,000 times 20, that's 40,000 years. 40,000 years of labor for all of those people to learn finance. Can't we put our time into something more useful? That's why I've made the program. It's like, let's have a few people learn in maybe a week what it's taken me literally a lifetime to assemble in terms of financial understanding and peace-based strategies. You can learn that in a week or so and then become a financial leader and help these, other vegan business leaders helping build the culture rather than each one of us independently trying to learn and literally compete with each other for capital. If there's one thing I hate seeing, it's people of high ethics, that I agree with. Let's say people with my ethics. Let's not say they're high ethics, but they're my ethics. And if there's anything I hate to see, it's people who I love, who are doing what I want, fighting with each other over money, competing with each other over money, when there's trillions of dollars sitting out there that would fund these companies if only they knew that they could and they existed. And so there's so many things to be done to help vegan leaders, vegan financial leaders, economic leaders, entrepreneurs, founders, investment fund managers. If we all work together, we can really move the world. If we compete with each other, well, let's just say the outcome is going to be different. And I would rather have all of us compete more actively with the old way of doing things. Can we bring people over to our value set? That's the real question. And then when we do that, what kind of products and services are we going to provide to them to make that easier and more fun and more enjoyable? I know I enjoy my life a lot, and I want to share that with as many people as I can. Ever since I went vegan, it's just gotten better and better every day. And if you're this far into the presentation, I think you know what I'm talking about. So we're getting to the end here. Let's review the path to $1 trillion. My goal is to train citizen financiers and get them engaged in the same kind of activities I enjoy doing every day. And I'm saying 100 or more. And these are people that are willing to take fairly large responsibility for the future. So If we have 100 citizen financiers and they each are responsible for about $10 billion on average, that's a path to $1 trillion. Now remember, again, between Goldman Sachs and BlackRock, they alone manage, well over 10 trillion. They're responsible for tens of trillions of dollars of decisions. So this is really just a beginning. It's like, I'm not saying this is easy. It takes something to be willing to be responsible for these kind of decisions. And that's what really, in the end, a lot of this training is like, can we grow into the shoes that we need to have to handle people's retirement funds, their college savings, everything that money represents. That's a big deal. I don't take it lightly at all. Now, if we train 1,000 citizen financiers, the responsibility of each individual goes down to just $1 billion to get to that same trillion. And you can see that kind of system is more resilient, less responsibility in any one person's hand. It's a distributed leadership approach. And at 10,000 citizen financiers, now the average responsibility is 100 million. And I think when we, in practice, what we're going to see is some people want to manage 50,000 or 100,000, and they're going to build some business maybe in a developing country where that money's like $1 million in the United States, or a small business in the United States. That's possible. And other people in our community are going to want to build something really large scale that ends up on, trading on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. There's room and purpose for all of us to work together. And that's really my message to everybody watching this video, is that if you want to work together with people who really care in this whole new way of organizing, that really adds something new, again, to politics, to YouTube videos. It's a really new dimension. And so I invite you to join Vegan Launch and join me in this mission of moving $1 trillion by 2025 for the animals, for the people, and for the planet. Thank you again for watching. I enjoyed making this presentation, and I hope to see you soon at veganlaunch.com.